Hi everyone, so today's class is about friction. Now let's think about a few things. How come you slip when you're running on a wet floor or grass? How is it possible that your soap is slippery when in shower? How come you can hold a book without dropping it? Well, the answer is simple. Friction. All these things are possible due to friction. So what is friction? Friction is a force that resists one object moving through or over something. It makes it more difficult for things to move. Let's take this picture for example. The man is trying to pull this very heavy red box. Now, the force at which he's pulling is called a reaction force, which is shown through the red arrow. The blue arrow is the frictional force, which is going in the opposite direction, which means that it's slowing the object down and making it harder for the man to pull the box. This is friction. Now, the amount of friction depends on the material from which the two surfaces that are rubbing against each other are made from. If you have two rough surfaces, let's say if you had a rock in one hand and a brick in the other hand and you rubbed it against each other, it would be hard to move. That's because there's more friction. And if you had water on a floor and your foot on top of it, there would be less friction as you can slip. Now, friction also produces heat. Let's do a little experiment. Take both of your hands, rub them slowly together. Now increase the speed and faster and faster. Do you feel your hands getting warmer? That's friction. Now let's watch an example.
Some surfaces are smooth and some are rough. Some are less rough and some are more rough. Even a smooth surface has some irregularities, roughness on it. For example, when we try to move one sandpaper over the other, the movement is not smooth. That means there is friction due to the interlocking of rough surfaces. But when we try to move one plain paper over the other, movement is smooth as compared to sandpaper. Thus, the roughness of sandpaper is more than that of the plain paper. So we can say that friction is produced due to the roughness of surfaces. Depending on the roughness of surfaces, the value of frictional force can be more or less.
So from this video, it shows that two sandpapers, when they're rubbed against each other, it's harder to rub them. That's because there's friction. Similarly, if you take two plain paper, they're easier to rub against each other because there's less friction. There are many different types of frictions, but the two that we'll be looking at are helpful friction and unhelpful friction. So let's look at some examples of friction. Helpful friction is when you have to push a ball. So when you kick a ball, the ball moves forward because the forward force is made by your foot. And the ball moves slowly because there's a friction force in the opposite direction. A frictional force will always slow down an object. So whenever you have two objects rubbing against each other, the object will always slow down. Now let's look at another helpful frictional force. Holding a bottle in your hand. Let's link back to the first question I asked. How can you hold a book in your hand without dropping it? It's the same example. The frictional force is in red. So your hands are creating friction between the bottle and your fingers. This allows the object to remain still. So a friction force can also stop an object from moving. Hence, you're able to hold your pens, your pencils, your bags. Everything is possible through friction. This is due to the frictional force being larger than the force provided by your hand pulling the object down, or pulling the bottle down in this example. Another helpful frictional force is walking. When you walk with your shoes, the rough surface at the bottom of your shoes rub against the ground, producing friction. However, if there's water on the floor, the friction reduces because the surface is smoother. As you can see in the second picture, the bunny is about to fall because there's less friction, whereas the man, he's able to walk smoothly without falling because the two surfaces rub against each other, producing friction, making the man walk in a normal pace without falling. Friction is a very important tool for walking. It allows your feet to hold the grip. Another example is ice skating or ice sledging. Ice skating can be seen in the girl with her skates, whereas ice sledding is the snowman on the snow mountains. In ice skating, the ground is made of ice on which the girl slides on. There is less friction, allowing the girl to slide and glide over the ice. However, ice is also not good for walking, as you can fall due to the lack of friction. Now let's move on to the unhelpful frictional forces. There are many places where frictional forces are unhelpful. For example, in a bicycle, there are chairs and axles that turn the wheels. These parts need to be lubricated with oil to reduce the friction. Lubrication, or lubricated as I said, is any substance that allows the friction to minimize and the movement to be smoother. Many of the times in our old bicycles, our chain would get rusted, which would not allow us to cycle anymore. This is when we would put oil to reduce the friction. Otherwise, it would make it harder for the wheels to turn, and the friction would create energy, causing the surroundings to get heated, or the chains to get heated in this case. Now, wet soap. This can be an unhelpful and a helpful frictional force. A dry soap is very easy to hold because there's a lot of friction between our hands and the soap surface. But a dry soap is unhelpful in cleaning your hands, as none of the particles or the surface of the soap would rub off on your hands, not allowing it to clean it. If we had a wet soap, there would be less friction between the two surfaces, and it would lubricate our hands or cover our hands with soap, reducing the friction. As I mentioned before, a lubricant is a substance that reduces friction between two contact surfaces, such as you could use oil, you could use grease, or in this case, soap can also be a lubricant. Now it's quiz time, guys. Let's take your knowledge and test it. So pause the video and write down the answers to these fill in the blanks. You can play the video once you're ready and get all the answers on the screen. But don't cheat! So, what are the answers? Friction is a type of force. Friction always reduces the speed of a moving object. Smoother surfaces have less friction than rough surfaces. Melting the snow on the road can increase the friction between the car and the road. Rubbing your hands together creates heat. Friction can slow things down or make things stand still. Now, let's try another exercise. Write down whether there's more friction or less friction in each of the given conditions. So the first one is using a bath mat. Second one is sliding on a polished slide. Now let's find out the answers. Using a bath mat would allow more friction because if your feet are wet after taking a shower and you put your foot down on a plain surface like the floor, it can allow you to slip. But if you have a mat, it would create friction between the mat and the foot that is wet, allowing you to not fall and hold your grip to the ground. Now, the second one, sliding on a polished slide. That has less friction because if it's polished, that means that it's a smooth surface, allowing less friction when you slide across it. Let's try some more. Pulling a bicycle brake. Second one, streamline aeroplane flying in the air. Streamline means that it has a pointy beak, as you can see in the red aeroplane in the picture. Now let's find out the answers. So when you pull a brake on your bike, what happens? There's more friction because you're stopping the flow of the bike or the wheel by pressing your brakes. This immediately creates friction, causing the bike wheel to come on a standstill or to slow down the bike. Next one. Streamline airplane flying in the sky. So when an aeroplane has a pointy nib, it can cut through the air, producing less friction and not slowing the aeroplane down as it flies through the air. It's time for you guys to do an experiment. Test which surface produces the most amount of friction. Now, the materials that you need are books, towel, paper, shirt or any cloth, a toy car, and a timer. So timer you can use on your watch or your phone clock. So how do we test the different surfaces and how much friction each produce? Firstly, create a small pile of books, then place a longer book on top of the pile, creating a slide. Don't change the height of the slide and make sure that your car slides down your book slide. Place one material. This could be a shirt or a towel or paper over the slide. Then place the toy car over the surface and set your timer on. Let it slide down. Using the timer, see how long it takes for the car to roll down, if it rolls down. Repeat this step for each of the different materials, which was the shirt or the towel or the paper. Compare the timing of each of the materials you've tested and see how friction played a role in allowing the car to move. And your results should have been that the car moved down easily with the paper. It had a little friction with the shirt. However, with Towel, it was very difficult for the car to slide down. Use the pictures as examples to help guide you creating your experiment. Thank you, everyone.